The New York Times exposed systemic and appalling abuses in the nail salon industry. It was hailed as a model of impact journalism, but now some troubling questions are emerging about the reporting. The price of nice nails is much higher than we think. That's the takeaway from Unvarnished, the much-lauded New York Times expose of nail salons. In a year of reporting, Sarah Maslin-Nier found an industry that routinely exploits undocumented workers, subjecting them to slave wages and other abuses.
People have to pay for their jobs, up to $200, sometimes even more. Then they work for free for weeks or months.
Maslin-Nier says the abuse is so endemic, Asian-language newspapers are rife with classified ads listing a starting wage of $10 a day. But that sounded fishy to Richard Bernstein, a former Times reporter who owns 2 salons with his wife. Writing in the New York Review of Books, Bernstein says he scoured months of Asian-language papers and failed to find a single classified advertising salon work for less than $70 a day. Bernstein also disputed how widespread other abuses are. So far, the New York Times is having none of it. In a letter to the Review, Times editors dismissed Bernstein's critique as industry advocacy, not unbiased journalism. All right, so there's a massive amount of verbiage to get through reading this back and forth. I have tried. I think I've reached a point where I can make a conclusion. But what do you guys think? Who won this exchange? Richard Bernstein or the New York Times? You read it all?
And, I have to say, I read the story. I read Richard Bernstein's response, and after reading Bernstein's response, I said, gee, the Times really dropped the ball. Then I read the Times response, and I said, I think the Times is looking pretty good on this. I thought their response was very, very strong. And
what was it about that response? And a lot of our viewers won't have read it, but what particular details in their response made you think, all right, the paper's okay?
Well, Richard Bernstein made a lot of the fact that he couldn't find classified showing that nail salon workers were being offered $10 an hour. And the a day. And the Times came back and said, well, here, here, and here. And then the fact that Governor Cuomo's office has gotten involved and has cited numerous violations of labor laws regarding this. I think that what the Times convinced me of is that I'm sure everything Richard Bernstein wrote is true, but it sounded like it was very anecdotal, whereas what the Times did was much more systematic and thorough and complete.
Kelly, what do you think?
I think that they could have answered him that way when he first made requests. Before he wrote his piece, he said, help me. I don't see any of these ads. We've been looking for months and months. I don't get what you're talking about. They ignored that. They were kind of snippy with him. They had a whole arrogant response to him. Now, maybe that was born out of we know what we did and it was a good piece. But I thought that was unnecessary, particularly for a guy who worked there and whose work they had respected in the past. Just answer the question and say, you might have a particular interest since you own a spa, but just so you know, on these days we found it, on this time we found it, and that's what we're saying. They didn't, and I just didn't really get to that. I didn't understand why it was necessary for them not to respond to him and then to get really snippy in the response to his response. That was my take.
It seems weird to me that the idea is, not all salons. Well, yes, I'm sure not all salons are going to be abusing workers. Exactly. Hashtag not all salons. It seems really crazy to me that you're quibbling over, well, yes, not all salons are going to do this. But the fact of the matter is that the Times story showed that there's just massive problems and people being treated in a way that we just don't expect in America. And to sort of nibble around the edges of that, and yes, obviously, if he didn't find any proof of it, that's one thing. But I think it sort of obscures the larger point of the story, which is that there are serious problems that seem to be almost endemic problems, and that the Times spent a lot of time investigating it. So to me, it just felt really weird that you would sort of try to bring them down over, well, it's not all of the salons,
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Professor Kennedy because I did not read all of the back and forth, although I did try to get through some of it. I would say this, though, and getting back to your point, Callie, about the sort of arrogant or unnecessarily snippy response to the Times to the initial criticism, the media has got to watch it more than ever because everybody is watching. There's anybody has resources at their fingertips to fact check you. So you have to be careful, to give you an example, about getting wrapped up in your own hype. Was it an appropriate use of the word rife to say that the papers are rife with examples of this disgraceful wage? Or would it have been better to say there are numerous examples, or some workers? Might have been a little less exciting.
The conditions they were describing can be found in virtually any salon in the New York area, as opposed to, many salons, dozens, hundreds.
Yeah, I think we just have to be careful, knowing that the entire world is looking over our shoulder with the resources to call us out.
One question I had, you talk about the Times getting snippy with him. His own description of his interaction with his former colleagues indicated that it was cordial, but they didn't really answer his question, and they didn't provide the ads that he was asking about. Now, what I wondered was whether he made it clear when he contacted the Times that he was thinking about writing a 3,000-word takedown in the New York Review of Books, or whether he said, "Hey, it's your old colleague Richard Bernstein." It makes a big difference, because if it's "Hey, it's me, Richard. I used to work with you. Now my wife and I are running 2 nail salons. Tell me, where'd you guys get these numbers?" I think they're going to respond differently if it's email from an old colleague versus email from an investigating
But in this case, they did not answer at all. So that was my point. It's different. It maybe if it's a difference if they say, "You know what, Richard, we don't have time to go into, but trust us, we got the goods." That's the personal take. But this was like, we're not even dealing with you.
All right, keep the New York Times on your brain, everyone, because we're going to deal with another Times-related story. The paper finds itself in yet another dispute this week, this time with Hillary Clinton's campaign. It comes after intense criticism that the Times moved far too slowly to correct this erroneous report, that Clinton faced a criminal inquiry into her email use as Secretary of State. Now, the Clinton campaign has published a scathing open letter on its website expressing serious concerns with how the Times originally reported the story. But the biggest gripe, according to the campaign, the New York Times refused to publish their letter. So on a story as troubled as this one clearly was, does the Times have any right to say, "We're not going to run your letter of grievance"?
Well, they have a right to say it, and if you don't want it, it's a 2,000-word letter, you really don't want to sacrifice that much in the print edition, put it on your website. What's the big deal? That's what sort of transparency and open dialogue is all about. I don't see any reason why they couldn't do that. And again, it looked as if, from reading the back and forth, that the Times story, while generally solid, may have erred in the use of the word criminal, and that's a big error. And if they did err, instead of in the middle of the night removing it and watering down the lead, they should have fully explained it right off the bat.
Not just the use of the word criminal, by the way, but also saying that Clinton herself was the target of the investigation.
And that turned out not to be quite accurate.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this story was not generally solid, because the suggesting that Hillary Clinton was under a criminal inquiry was so far off base that it just undermined the entire story. I completely agree with John. You're not going to publish a 2,000-word letter in the print edition, but they certainly could have put it on their website. The fact that they didn't has made it a bigger story, and this has just been a story that has been rife with problems from the moment it was published. Margaret Sullivan, the public editor, wrote about it this week, and she had this devastating observation in there where she quoted Dean Baquet, the editor, as saying, he kept sending the reporters back to confirm details of this, and she said she clearly came away with the impression that they kept going back to the same source over and over. I mean, this has just been a real major screw-up by the Times. I don't think they screwed up the nail salon story, but I certainly think they screwed up this one to a fairly well.
And I think it's, for us as journalists, we can understand the reluctance to publish the letter in print, obviously, because of the actual column inches involved there. But also, I think probably there's some reluctance in terms of, are you giving a campaign basically free advertising or free exposure? And that's the thing where you can understand some of their feelings about maybe not wanting to do that. But again, I'd agree with everyone here that absolutely you can link to that online. You can publish that in a place online. They have spaces for that. But I think that overall, this is something that we're talking about at the Times in these last 2 stories in particular, but it's something that we see with so many media companies and so many publications. You don't want to really address something until it reaches a tipping point, because it seems like the second you sort of have those cracks show, people will pounce. And you can't do that every single time someone has sort of a quibble or a problem with the story. And we all know that people have that all the time. So I can again understand the Times wanting to sort of take it easy before this thing sort of blew up. But
they've
again, they screwed up in this case.
And on this one, remember, initially they said they hadn't screwed up. They said, we're not going to correct it because we didn't make a mistake, and they sure did.
Well, my point is a little bit of what Justin has said, and that is, I know that people don't want a response, and you said many media companies have the same thing, but this is the New York Times. And so the first time I heard the wrong story was the next day on Morning Joe. Okay? That's, and I'm just saying that to say it's a mob thing. After they put something in, everybody picks up on it. So now you got all of this reverberation, and all of those people have to then go back and say, oh, oops, the first time we heard it, that was wrong. So they have to take an extra measure of success. I get it about not giving the campaign that space, but hey, and 2,000 words at that. I really get it, New York Times. I don't blame you. You don't want to publish that. But the web, put it on there. Clean yourself up. I just think in this case they thought it would go away, and this would make it come back if they put this 2,000 word letter in. Well, it didn't work.